Hey guys, welcome to today's session. We're going to talk about the judge prison. This is the first of 10 prisons that we all seem to put ourselves in. Peter Krohn came up with this awesome framework, if you will, about 10 self-imposed prisons that we put ourselves in. And I find this particularly adaptable to gay men as we struggle with perfectionism, if we struggle with comparison in particular, body comparison, job comparison, success comparison in particular. I find that this framework that he came up with is life changing and transformative in many ways on its own. But when you apply it into our world as gay men, it becomes even more useful and helpful in helping you transform and find true fulfillment. So the first one that I'm going to talk about today is probably the most I don't know if it's hard to really pick one, but this one in particular I think resonates pretty hard with us, is particularly those of us, which is almost all of us, who compare ourselves to others and try to find out if we're fitting in, if we're better than others, if we're worse than others. At the end of the day, just trying to see where we rank in the pecking order. This concept, the judge prison, is pretty enlightening and helping you realize the limits of that, and then some strategies that we'll cover today on how to escape that prison. So moving out of the goal of this will be giving you some strategies on how to move out of constant criticism and transform that more into compassion awareness. So as I mentioned, this is one of 10 of the invisible, self-imposed, if you will, prisons, the primal prisons that Peter Krohn, a fantastic coach, mentor, and just overall person, has created. And so the first one we'll talk about today is the judge prison, where we're really diving into it. So what do we mean by the judge prison? Well, you probably have an idea of where we're going here, but the judge prison is just this idea, this concept, this reality of constantly scanning for what's wrong with yourself, with others, or circumstances. And all of this in an effort to make us feel safe or superior, or as we'll talk about, a false sense of superiority, if you will. I'll move my little picture out of the way here for you. But these judgment and discernment are different things. And I think calling out the difference between these two might be helpful. So what we're talking about here is not discernment. Discernment would be observing without attachment. Judgment, on the other hand, assigns worth and finds fault. So that's really the key difference. Discernment is a little bit more open, and judgment assigns worth, finds fault. So those are some key parts here. But the hidden purpose around why we judge, why we find ourselves in this prison, is this idea that if I can find what's wrong, I can fix it and finally be safe, worthy, or right. So that's the hidden purpose that's there. That if I can find what's wrong, it's almost like a false sense of control. That if I can find what's wrong, I can fix it and we'll be good. But there's limits to that, as we'll start to unpack here in a little bit. The judge believes that criticism is going to create change, but in reality, judgment paralyzes and it never inspires growth. And I often say to clients that when you judge somebody and you're like, ooh, at least I'm not like that person, it gives you this temporary place of, okay, I'm okay. But the reality is, on the other side of that coin, when you judge someone and then you embrace superiority, you have to admit that the possibility exists now that someone, and the likely possibility that someone somewhere will be better than you. So you have entered yourself into that game. And the consequences of that is continuous performance, that you're constantly scanning and making sure you're superior. But when, and inevitably when, the moment comes where someone is superior to you, it is incredibly destructive. And it feels like your life is falling apart because, and as a consequence of that, we're constantly performing. We're constantly scanning. And oftentimes we put up and subscribe to perfectionism, because even if we're not better, if we can make everyone think we're better and give the illusion that we're okay. But as time goes on as a gay man, this as authenticity comes rolling in as a value for you, that's just something I think that inevitably comes with age. This mechanism, this performance becomes exhausting, and it starts to cracks in the foundation, that as your authentic self emerges and grows, it can't hold this thing together anymore, this whole performance. So that's some of the information and background about the differences between judgment and discernment, and why this is not an effective, fulfilling way to continue to live your life. Now, there's three different judgment dimensions or directions. I like directions here. So first, obviously, is judging yourself. And this probably happens more so than anything else. And it's debatable if we really actually judge others, or if it's just us judging ourselves in other forms. Something to think about. But for context for today, these three directions, starting with judging of yourself, really the inner critic, this is its game. This is where it's really loud to you, that it finds fault with everything you do, you say, you feel, or you think. So you can see an example there. I'm too much, I'm not enough, I'm too feminine, I'm too masculine, I should have known better. One of the most worthless phrases in the world, because that's just not even possible. Even a split second after you should have known better, you have hindsight, you have the gift of experience and time. So it's a waste, and most often things of judgment of ourselves are a waste. But nonetheless, the inner critic is relentless in finding fault with everything you do. Then, of course, it's judging others, which is probably oftentimes what we think about most when we judge, when we're thinking about judgment. So by judging others, we're scanning what's wrong with them so that we feel superior, safe, or right. So how that manifests, he's too dramatic, he's too feminine, he's dumb as a box of rocks, they're so lazy, she should have known better. All of these judgment things, again, they are scanning, oftentimes us scanning to feel superior, and under the false limiting belief that if we are superior, we are better and we are safe. But as your authentic self continues to emerge and grow as a gay man, it just doesn't hold up anymore. The third one here is judging circumstances. So this one might feel a little bit new or different than these other two, because it's not necessarily people, but it's circumstances, right? And I oftentimes think that it gives us an opportunity to become victim and hopeless, and therefore not have to take action. So judging circumstances means like you're declaring a certain situation wrong or unfair as a way to avoid accepting what is. So this shouldn't be happening. That shouldn't be happening. That is an ineffective action. An example I heard recently was someone complaining about protests aren't effective. They were judging the circumstances, right? That's a waste of time. It shouldn't be happening. It doesn't do anything. Well, no, that's not true. But regardless, it's an example of judging circumstances. So it's something maybe that people are a part of, but in and of itself, like in that situation, that basically was that person's excuse to not participate in a protest because, well, they don't work, they're ineffective, they don't do anything, shouldn't be happening, it's a waste of time. They were judging the situation, declaring it wrong, useless, whatever, as a way of accepting that they could actually do something and be a part of it. So it absolved their action. Another one that comes up often is breakups, right? This shouldn't be happening. And it oftentimes, in the initial stages of breakups in particular, it absolves people of different behaviors and of leaning into the discomfort. So judging circumstances is more so not people, but situations, occurrences, things like that, that of course people are a part of. But when we judge them, it gives us a way out. We can use the victim card. So take a second, look at the three directions of judgment here, and which one of these directions feels most familiar for you? I think for myself, pretty hard on myself, so judging yourself probably is the winner for me. But also, as I mentioned, and let me move myself out of here a bit, what I mentioned is I think that judging yourself and judging others are essentially the same thing. I think when we judge others for something, we're really picking apart something that we're judging ourselves for, and we're just like externalizing it, or we're just projecting it. So that's something that I kind of that's my own opinion on this, that I think really at the end of the day, it is just judging yourself. All three of these dimensions are, when you really think about it. But nonetheless, I think it is really easy and helpful to pull these into three different dimensions. So take a second, identify which direction feels most familiar with you and why. All right, well, let's move on here. But why do we become judges? Well, a lot of the ways we were socialized, we don't have a lot of say in it, right? And for most of us, we picked up on this judgment character or part or behavior from how we were raised. And guess what? The people who raised us picked this up from the people that raised them. So this is a generational thing, if you will. But we learned how to judge in environments where criticism basically was how to love, how worth was determined and safety was determined. So judgment was a place of safety. I can remember this even in my own upbringing. I think maybe the fancy word would be evaluating, and evaluating circumstances, evaluating people, to help determine safety and status and worth and love. So these were all environmental things, and how we were raised, and how we were raised in a primary sphere of influence was, for most of us, was our parents or grandparents, things like that. So we model and continue to display the same place, the same false belief, really, that if we judge and we are superior, we are safe. And that's simply just not true, but it is a human condition that we continue to do. And it's rooted in our ancestral upbringings, right? So really, especially when we are more tribal in nature, if you were thrown out of the camp, you were basically left for dead. So having a sense of superiority and insisting on that was a defense mechanism, a survival mechanism. So it's often why this judgment character or part in our minds is pretty strong. But it also provides us an illusion of control. And so you'll see that if I criticize myself first, I can control the narrative, beat others to the punch, or prove I care about being good. So criticizing yourself first is oftentimes the illusion of self-control. It's often like, well, no one can criticize me because I criticize me. And so that oftentimes kills many of our dreams and ambitions. We do, not anyone else, but we do. So, and the reality is, and I see this also with a lot of my clients, that we do more harm for ourselves in trying to avoid people harming us with the same tactic than if we had just left ourselves alone and risked someone hurting us. So one of the things I will hear all the time, men will beat themselves up over not feeling masculine enough, constantly berating. Their inner critic constantly says, oh, you shouldn't have held your hand like that. You shouldn't have walked like that. Your voice is too high. All of this, all in an effort to protect themselves from other people doing the same thing. And it is very unlikely that you're going to walk somewhere and that's just the first thing out of the blue. Is it possible? Yes. Is it, depending on the environment, maybe the circumstances increase the probability that someone calling you not masculine enough? Yes, those vary for certain, but they are not 100%. But when you criticize yourself for that with your inner critic, it is 100% of the time. You are constantly doing that, all in an effort to avoid the lower probability chance that someone else other than you would say that about you. So it's the illusion of self-control to the detriment of your own well-being. You're constantly telling yourself horrible things about yourself. You believe them, all in an effort to avoid the unlikelihood in many instances that someone else would say that to you. So it's the illusion of self-control to your own detriment, right? Now, if I judge others, this is the same idea externalized, right? That I have control, I feel superior, distract from my own flaws, or create distance when closeness feels unsafe. I find that this happens a lot online, and this, especially with doom scrolling, at the gym and at work, that we're looking around comparing others to make sure we feel superior. The downside to that, and also I think the dangers of the algorithm is the algorithm doesn't know this, what we're talking about. It just sees you looking, and it assumes that you are looking at something that you should continue to keep looking at. So if you find a hot guy and it makes you feel, you start judging yourself, it's going to continue that parade and show you those people. And you're going to continue to criticize yourself first. So this is an instance almost of where judging others, when it doesn't work out, it almost always results in you judging yourself even harshly, more harshly. But when you look at someone's picture and you see that, oh, I'm better than that, ironically, you don't see a lot of those, don't get a lot of pushes by the algorithm. And if you think about that, it's because we are emotionally way more invested when we don't measure up than when we do. That's another story for another day. But judging others here, it creates the false sense of superiority, that you can distract and avoid your own flaws if you can point them out in other people. And we oftentimes will do this at work. I know when I still coach leaders that new employees in particular are quick to judge and scan to see, oh, am I okay? Am I good? Oh, I'm not great, but at least I'm better than Sue over there, or at least I'm better than Joey. But that at least part doesn't ever sit right. And it doesn't sit right, again, as your authentic self continues to grow. We know that we're going after other people, even if it's in our own mind. That's not kind. That's not usually in alignment with an integrity value that most of us have as we continue to grow. So if I judge others, we feel superior, but that quickly deteriorates. It becomes fulfilling, useless, and in fact, then it oftentimes results in us judging others because we know that judging other people is kind of hateful and hurtful. And then finally, if I judge circumstances, that gives you the opportunity to avoid responsibility. You can remain a victim, throw your hands up and say, there's nothing I can do, and refuse to accept what you can't control. So the takeaway on this slide in particular, too, you see at the bottom, over time, judgment becomes your default lens that you continuously scan for problems and not possibilities. The brain is fantastic at searching for threats. That's how we've survived this long. It's nothing better than the brain doing that, right? But if you program it to only scan for problems, you're always going to find a problem. It's fantastic at finding them. So if you start scanning for possibilities, start scanning for positive outcomes that you're looking for, the brain starts to do that. The ideas and the tunnel vision start to open up, and you start to scan and spotlight things that you never knew were possible. It's sort of like that idea that you hear all the time that once you buy a new car, you start to see it everywhere. That's how the brain works. It's literally what it's doing. But you are what you scan for. You find what you're scanning for. So there's a weight and a cost for judgment. We've alluded to some of those already, but there's an internal toll and then there's an external toll, right? So the internal toll goes without saying, chronic shame and anxiety. And this continues to grow because as we grow as gay men, our sense of authenticity grows and has expectations and needs for things that are fulfilling, and starts to discredit things that aren't that. And that grows subconsciously and can become consciously once you're aware of that. But the internal toll of chronic shame and anxiety, that you're constantly feeling you're never good enough. There's always something wrong to find and fix. And again, that comes with the mindset of always scanning for a problem and not for possibilities. Also, paralysis and perfectionism. These continue to grow and escalate, but also at the same time become more taxing on us because we know that they're not really helpful. So if it can't be perfect, why try? I hear this constantly for guys my age and older, that if I'm going to start something new, I need to be perfect at it. Otherwise, I'm not going to give it a go. I hear an example, guys who want to start running and they're in like their 40s and 50s. Well, it's going to be hard when you start it. And people don't want to start because they're going to be bad at it at first. We forget, though, that when you start something new, you're not supposed to be good at it. You shouldn't be good at it. No one just shows up and is a professional runner at something. So that's the judgment piece, that it freezes action, the fear based in that freezes action, kills creativity, and things that could have been never are. And then obviously it's exhausting. Constantly having this cognitive dissonance in your brain about yourself, others, and others. Life is just draining. There's no rest. You just want to crawl back into bed, sleep through your alarms, naps during the day at work, whatever. You're constantly exhausted. Goes without saying, the external tolls slowly start to disconnect from other people. People start to feel your criticism of them, even if you're not saying it. People, you get that sense when someone's competing with you, and even if you ask about it, hey, are you like competing and comparing to me? People will always say no, but they're doing it. You can see it, even you can feel it even like a fitness class or at the gym, that you feel that energy. At work and in life, it has much more consequences than like a 50-minute class. People you work with can feel this disconnect, and they start to trust you less, all without a word even being said. True intimacy requires acceptance, not evaluation. So I hear this a lot with guys, 30s, 40s, and 50s, where they kind of start dating someone, and then somehow this kind of comes into a competition. Or people who get into open relationships, it becomes a competition. I got a hot guy, now I need to get, he got a hot guy, now I need to get a hot guy. This does not work in terms of accentuating and growing the intimacy. So it requires acceptance and curiosity, not evaluation. Superiority and loneliness, you would think those are a paradox, but judging others to keep you above also keeps you alone. So you can't connect from a pedestal. I love that. You can't connect from a pedestal. You can't be elite in the mindset and then expect people to want to have a true connection with you. And then missing the present moment. Everything becomes a performance, and you're always looking for the next thing, the next threat, looking for the next fault. You're too busy finding fault in people and experiences to actually get to experience what's actually here right now. We've alluded to some of these, but how judgment shows up in gay men, of course, body judgment, harsh mostly inside, but doesn't take very far in many comment sections online to see that that doesn't stay inside your mind for very long, not just internally judging, but other people do it too. And remember, I think in body judgment in particular, this is where my idea that you're really not judging anyone else, it's all internal, that when people say mean things and judge people's bodies and things like that online, they're really just judging themselves, and they're admitting that they are insecure, that they don't love the way that they look, and so you shouldn't be able to love it either. So just understand the dynamics of body judgment, and that the internal judge on this is way more worth the work on. So body judgment, not feeling fit enough, not having the physique, not masculine enough, not lean enough, abs are there, butt's not big enough, legs aren't big enough, whatever. The app culture in particular amplifies this. Doom scrolling on TikTok and Instagram. It's just like and Grindr and Sniffies and all of these apps and Scruff, they all kind of provide an unfortunate environment and a toxic environment where body judgment only gets worse. No one has ever logged into those apps and resolved their body image and body judgment issues. They've only gotten worse. Success comparison, as I talked about a little bit earlier, that measuring your success, gay men, there's like gay men, very affluent gay men, and you all hear about those and see those, and their homes look like museums, but there's also people that just don't do that and have normal lives and are absolved from comparing themselves in success and accolades and materialistic things. That success in true fulfillment is reevaluated. Like, what is success? Well, in the gay world, we are just so quick to jump to measuring career, income, and relationship status as key indicators of success. But that's such a limiting belief. Those are just things and just actions. True success is up to you. It's not reliant on other people. So that's where we really trip up as gays, is that we compare ourselves to others to then figure out how successful we are, rather than you determining your own success criteria. And then finally, dating judgment. Finding fault in every date, or finding fault in yourself on every date. Dates are too boring. people too much, people talk about things that aren't interesting, or they shouldn't talk about this and that on a first date. The book that we could all write on ways we've been judged and the way we've judged people on dates, on first dates, on second dates. Oh, he tried to kiss me on the first date, judge, right? Or uh, he doesn't pay for the bill, and when he asks me out, judge. He's not as cute as he was in person, judge. All of that mismatched energy takes its toll on you and the person. The person feels that energy, and certainly you do too. Your own well-being takes a hit when we're constantly judging people on dates. So just a few things. Take a second though, which of these, and of course, internalized homophobia, kind of skipped over that, but it's probably the biggest one because I think it finds its way in each of the other judgment places. So it's a little bit more of a connector, because I think it's an ongoing thing that as gay men, we all have a responsibility to evaluate and continue to evaluate as we grow. That judging yourself and others for being too gay or being too feminine, masculine enough, whatever, reinforcing stereotypes. Those are just the big kind of obvious symptoms of internalized homophobia. But body judgment, success comparison, dating, all of those other things that I touched on, you can see that they connect to internalized homophobia. So if you continue to do that work and address it and continue to address it, you're going to find that improvements in those other three areas also emerge out of that. And I think it's important to note that there's a vicious loop that goes along with judgment and shame. Those two have a very unique and destructive dance with each other. And you can see this whole thing here kind of swirls around I'm not enough. That's like the center, the eye of the hurricane that's kind of driving the whole thing. And if you know anything about the other 10 prisons that Peter Krohn has shared with us, that really is the center of it. So this is very appropriate. But we can start over here at the judge to protect. So like if you criticize first, you control the narrative, right? The false narrative, or you think, right? But inevitably that creates a sense of shame because you then go, well, judgment reinforces unworthiness, right? So you feel shame about that. And then you go back to the familiar tool. Okay, well, we're just going to turn up the heat on judgment. So more criticism. So try to fix the shame with more criticism. And then that inevitably goes back to the core wound of I'm not enough. And the cycle it's a downward spiral, as you can see, right? The graph kind of shows that it's all sort of downward spiraling, but it continues to just be an echo and reinforce the limiting belief of I'm not enough. And these are just the tools that you use to reinforce that limiting belief. So at the end of the day, judgment never creates the safety it promises. It only deepens shame. It only deepens shame. And I think most of us can kind of know that. And many of us, when we judge, when you take a step back, you realize that you really are destroying yourself. It's not judging other people. All of them really point back to you, and helps to ask, is this the person that I want to be? Is this the person that I am becoming? Am I becoming a bigger judge? Because if that's the case, if I'm judging myself and others more, I'm just amplifying that I'm not enough. But when I change course, I recognize in a moment, oh my gosh, I'm judging myself, or oh, I'm judging other people. And I know how destructive that is and how the false illusion that that's providing. When you start to catch that, you start to subscribe to a different limiting belief that instead of I'm not enough, maybe it's I am enough, or I am kind, I am compassionate, whatever it might be, the opposite of I'm not enough. Start with that too, that recognizing when I'm judging that I'm subscribing to I'm not enough. So start there first. Instead of that must mean I'm not enough. I'm thinking I'm not enough. Let's go to something else. What does someone do in a situation that is enough and still feels inadequate? Well, we find other ways to try and fulfill and escape in the moment. I'm feeling afraid because I'm a new employee, and that's normal. I don't need to compare myself to other people to see if I'm okay. You can recognize that someone who's enough can believe the idea that I'm new and I'm not supposed to know everything, and this is just my perfectionism trying to protect me. So let's take a minute and reflect on some of the stuff that we've learned. Where are you judging the most right now? So take a second. Let's move it out of here. Where do you notice judgment is showing up the most in your life right now? Which direction is most active, self, others, or circumstances? And take a second to think about and notice who or what are you judging the most? Is it yourself? Is it a certain person, maybe your spouse or friend? Is it a boyfriend, a friend, a parent, a kid, whatever? What does the judgment sound like? When does it get the loudest? And then ask yourself these other questions. What am I trying to control or fix? Remember, that is usually the question that's driving judgment. What am I trying to control or fix? And what am I afraid to will happen if I stop? What are you afraid is going to happen if you stop judging? All right. And judgment is not something that's going to go away overnight. Like many of these prisons, it's going to be a continuous practice, the lifelong practice of freedom, because that is at the end of that's what's waiting at the end of the tunnel when we break out of these prisons. So the benefit, the why you should think about judging less and feeling not so and leaving behind the limiting belief that I'm not enough. The first step here is awareness that, well, and freedom is what we're aspiring for, freedom and clarity, right? So the first step toward that is awareness, that your work is not just to stop the judge, but to notice when it shows up. We don't have to fight it, but just catch yourself and name it, saying, I'm judging right now. What that does takes you out of autopilot. You're flying the plane, everything, whatever, but once you say, I'm judging, you are now at the helm, you are controlling the plane. You have your hands on it, you can do something different. So that's why awareness comes choice. So each time you notice, you create a space between the pattern and your response. So each time you take yourself out of autopilot, you start to create a new automatic response. When you start doing that a few times, it starts to do it automatically. It kind of becomes its own autopilot. Autopilot becomes getting off of autopilot and using your brain to remind you where you are and where you really want to go. So you can choose a different path, curiosity and compassion instead of criticism. And note too, you are not your judgments. They're just trying to protect you. They've served a purpose. You didn't have a choice in inheriting this. Remember, that is something that has been passed on to us and passed on to those who passed it on to us. They're old protective patterns, but with awareness, you can choose something different. So that gets us to the end of our first real exploration into these 10 prisons. I hope that you found this useful and you can think about, again, taking that first step, awareness, getting yourself out of autopilot, and then you seeing the choice that becomes a little bit more evident as each time you remove yourself from autopilot, grab the controls, that you have a choice. You're not your judgments, they're old protective patterns, but to break them and move on, it's required of that first step of awareness.